chance you'll have.
Well, then I'm running to class, so I'm like, okay, yeah, where do they have to go? Back to my phone part. Okay, yeah.
That's what that's unfortunately, probably between about 20 till or so, I gotta get out of here to get over here, so.
Perfect time in 20 minutes.
Oh,
So,
perfect.
I have to.
You get the same thing we do.
I have 2 hours in class, so I'm like, okay. Oh gosh, you got busy day. Yeah, it's just worked out that way, you know, yeah, so good I'm here. So I will, I mean, I thought my slides. Yeah, about it. And a 5-minute one is going to be at what time? Unfortunately, if I say 5 minutes, time. Yeah, and then that way I know. And and soon enough, because I obviously have. Okay, and then I have some good questions. Yes. Yeah. And you just.
I was about to say,
I thought about sending my cards from here, but I really can't. The good thing is I don't have to do anything. For prep, for papers, yeah.
It was still there.
Good. Well, I will.
In our building?
Yeah, in front of the ball, but 500.
Yeah.
So if I don't remember you, I.
Oh, I don't apologize at all, I did that,
Semester
no.
for you. It's going great. I mean, every college relatives.
So are you still in
It just
the
seems like always.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it so far. I think a lot of programming classes never programmed before, so.
Yeah.
But at the end, it's good.
never programmed?
I know, which is very odd in my high school days, but yeah, like,
It
it's not bringing programming, but it's great learning and it's just sort of surprising.
So they're always,
Yeah, they do a lot of good stuff.
Just thinking,
Where'd you go to high
school?
So I started high school at Unions, so I just went up the road.
Especially when you're not in that digital natives.
No, okay, good. That's the other side.
Are you teaching any courses this semester?
Yeah.
I prefer that over the opposite.
400, 500.
Wow. Make sure you're seniors.
Yeah, most seniors.
Yeah.
Well, then
I'm a graduate.
Yeah, I don't.
1 or 2 days from.
Or the science, the baseball involved with that, or you've been traveling quite a bit.
yeah, I was actually just at the spring training.
I was gonna say, it's a great time of year for that.
Good time to be in Arizona right now.
Yeah, and if you're involved in the baseball industry. What teams are you going on here?
We're working with the Diamondbacks, of course, the Angels, the Padres. So I'll be,
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm just hoping to get
Where those are. I usually like what I do.
potentially what class? Is it a programming?
Oh, okay.
Okay, so what's your digital? Yeah, I apologize.
what's your major?
I'm still about this. I find it very fun. Yeah, we do I start first? Do I see Kelly first? Why?
Yeah, I mean, that's my roommate and I are right now looking for a house. You guys are like, I mean, that's everyone's. So
How's it going?
That type of stuff is ready for a deep breath.
Sort of.
Okay. Really? That's perfect.
That's more important.
Yeah, exactly. We talked a lot about that.
Close to it. Yeah, that was really interesting. Thank you very much. 2 years.
That's just back to what I was thinking the exact
As
same.
far as how long have you been here? I teach the information technology in my.
I do remember. I don't really.
Good afternoon. Hello in the back. Can you hear me in the back tables? Yes, you can hear me. Great. You can hear me. Wonderful. So welcome everyone. My name is Karna Walter. I'm Assistant Dean for Student Engagement in the Honors College, and one of the roles I play is to organize our Honors SmartTalk series. We have faculty at the U of A who are doing a myriad of interesting projects, and so one of the things we try to do with our SmartTalk series is to bring students and faculty and friends of the Honors College together to hear about some of those projects that our faculty are undertaking. So I want to welcome those of you who are in the room today. I also want to welcome our colleagues at U of A South. We have some colleagues and some honors students on that campus who I think are joining us today right now, or possibly even later as they are listening into the Smart Talk today. So welcome to all of you. Our speaker today, I'm excited to hear what she has to say. She has a class that she's teaching at 1, so we are going to be efficient with the use of our time today. There may be some of you who have classes or other obligations at 1 also, so we are going to respect your time and get you on your way. So Professor Anita Bhappu is at the Norton School of Family and Consumer Sciences. She is an associate professor there, an honors professor, and co-director of the Consumers, Environment, and Sustainability Initiative. And as we were just chatting before I began this introduction, she was telling me a little bit about her history at the U of A, and she has been at the U of A in different capacities over the years. Most recently, I think 2008 was when she came back here and began her work in the Norton School. So she has a really fascinating topic to talk about today, and I think a lot of you will probably found this topic compelling enough that you wanted to sign up for this particular Smart Talk. So with that, I will hand the microphone, or do you?
Can you hear me in the back table? Great. So if you want to leave it there, I won't leave it.
Okay.
No. Okay, good.
Take it away. Thank you.
Thank you. So, thank you for hosting me, and I'm looking forward to telling you a little bit about what I consider to be my most recent journey that I'm currently on. I'll just back into it a bit with a little bit of history. So, Karna mentioned the Consumers, Environment, and Sustainability Initiative, which still is something that my colleague Sabrina Helm and I started. And as part of that, I have been, not this semester, but every spring teaching an individual society class on consumers' environment and sustainability. And so, interestingly, this project, this journey started in that class. And I want to sort of credit all my undergrad students, mostly freshmen who were in there, and many honors students as well, for at least giving me the inspiration to jump on the ship that I'm currently sailing, albeit not very well at times. So having said that, what I'm going to do is try to walk you through the journey briefly from a content perspective, and I will end by talking a little bit more about Sharing Tribes, the company, which is the keeper owner of the developer of the app in question. But I really wanted to start a bit more with the title and start from a discussion of share more and buy less. And that's where at least I'm going to go. So on that note, some of you may or may not know that there is such a phenomenon today in the marketplace called the sharing economy. And the sharing economy, and I will talk a bit more about the sharing economy, is really where we see from a consumer retail perspective a lot of activity in terms of consumers choosing to engage in what we call sharing over buying. And sharing can take the form of rental on the most sort of transactional space. And it also is very much in the domain of lending and borrowing, as you would traditionally think of sharing, the way your parents taught you as kids to share your toys. So it spans that whole spectrum of behavior out there. And so I'll be sort of focusing on the American case, although I'll give you some data that highlights how we are similar or different vis-a-vis the rest of the world. But importantly, we are the world's biggest consumers in terms of not only the dollar amount, but the impact of our consumption, environmentally speaking. And so that's why the focus on the American consumer is there, because that's where potentially the most potential impact, or in other words, we could move the needle to change that behavior and have an impact from that. So when we look at the sharing economy and data about what Americans think about it, there are three motivators for most people in America participating in the sharing economy. And this is in sort of order of preference. The first one is that people participate in the sharing economy to save money. So rather than buying something, they're accessing it, whether it's rental or sharing it through a borrow-lend type of context. They also engage in the sharing economy because they're looking to build relationships with other peers or other people which they are exchanging goods and services in this economy. And then lastly, and somewhat maybe not as well assumed, is that the environmental impact of their consumption is the least important of those three motivations. In other words, because they're not buying a new good and we're not using the resources to produce and then provide that good in a retailing context, the environmental footprint of sharing, as we know it, where you're taking one resource or one good and getting more utility out of it, is hypothetically better for the environment. So that's kind of the environmental piece. So with that, when you compare the US to the rest of the world, we're actually the weakest part of the globe, insofar as sharing and the sharing economy is much more active and popular around the world than it is here. And so again, this question of the US case study becomes important. And what you see is that in terms of intent, there is a lot higher intent in so-called global south countries and or the less developed world, from the perspective of gaining access to goods that people may otherwise not be able to afford to buy. So what is this sharing phenomenon that I've alluded to, which we call the sharing economy, as it compares to how we've traditionally bought and sold goods in the retail sector? And I think what I want to leave you with in terms of a thought is that it represents, in my mind, the natural progression of what we know to be today crowd behavior in many other domains of our lives. So we're comfortable today when we look at goods and services getting recommendation data and review data that's crowdsourced from peers. We're comfortable today with the idea of open source software, where that software has been developed by many crowdsourced developers. And so what the sharing economy represents to retail is really a democratization or a decentralization of our supply side. So what we're doing here is, instead of consumers buying a good or a service from a centralized supply or an organized supply chain that's represented by a retailer and a manufacturer, consumers are now getting access to those goods and services from other consumers. They're crowdsourcing the supply. And the other phenomenon that is apparent in the sharing economy and really distinguishes it from what I would call sharing behavior in a more communal, neighborly sense, the type of practice that has long been around as far as humans are concerned, is that what we are seeing is the emergence of these technology-enabled platforms. The platform is the meeting place for the consumer and the consumer's sort of crowdsourced peer that's providing a good or a service. And so these platforms, the ones that you probably know, represent the quote-unquote businesses or the keepers of the sharing economy. And then in terms of the providers, the people who are renting their cars or providing their pet sitting services via these platforms, most of those people who are providers are independents. They're considered, at least, and this is highly and hotly debated, they're considered not to be employees, but to be sort of independent contractors in their own right. So when you look at the sort of performance or the market scaling of the sharing economy today represents, or I should say the sharing economy is predicted in 2025 to be what e-commerce is today. Okay, so all of e-commerce that we take for granted, the whole domain of online retail and buying and selling through a technology, digitally enabled technology interface, that's roughly about $300 to $350 billion of sales, and that's what the sharing economy is on track to be in 2025. So it's not something that is going away. And in fact, from a retailer perspective, and more importantly, from a retailing professor perspective, it's that new space that I got interested in understanding. And I've been teaching about it in that SESI class that I alluded to in there. So what I have up here are, and this is last year's data, these are 17 companies in the sharing economy, platforms, if you will, all of whom are valued at $1 billion or more. And 10 of these, and I don't know them off the top of my head, are considered what we call unicorns in the startup world in terms of their valuation. You know, the most popular or the most known one being Uber. So what we see here is a lot of money pouring in, not only in terms of venture capital and investments into these platforms, but the reason that that money is flowing to them is they have gained tremendous consumer traction. So there are lots of people on these platforms, be it in the role of a customer or a buyer, or in the role of a provider, seller. And that's the reason that that money has flown to them. Several of them are not yet profitable, meaning they're still trying to figure out their business models, and who knows whether they will. But that said, this is where the activity is, and that's why it's getting a lot of attention, so to speak. Now, in contrast to the more sort of market case and this venture capital-backed solutions, there is still, and there are platforms that have a more communal sort of feel to them. And in this case, the exchanges that happen are not as focused on the monetary transaction, as many of them. So Yodel is a platform where you can get or give away stuff that you don't no longer want. So your sort of junk is someone's treasure, and you can get it. you can get that treasure, and they have sort of a currency, a social currency on the platform that they have built to enable people to do this exchange. But it has done very well. It got a $1 million investment from Patagonia Ventures, and it is a listed benefit corporation in the state of California. It's out of San Francisco, which is where many of these platforms are. But that said, it's a good example of this behavior in a communal sense in the goods case, not the car rental case or the car sharing case or the lodging case or the financial case, which are the big sectors, but in the goods case. You also have Tucson Born Free Cycle, born here in Tucson, and it is not as much an exchange in terms of borrow-lend, but this is where if you have things you no longer want, other people can come and claim them. You can give them away and find each other on the platform. And then another more recent phenomenon that is more based on the Facebook platform and groups is this idea of the Buy Nothing Project, which has, again, scaled in terms of the size. There are in Tucson Buy Nothing Facebook groups where people do the same thing. They post, hey, I'm looking for 4 chairs, or I'm looking for, or I have an old mattress, good condition, who wants it? And that's the sort of, but it's much more geographically tied to the local context than the other two. Okay? So with that, and all of this activity, what's the sort of downside or the risk side of this environment? And this is a piece of research that was represented by this marketing company called Campbell Metham. It supports all my qualitative research, so I use it as a way to talk about it. But what I want to highlight are what kind of is the big bucket from the consumer user perspective of the issues with the current offerings in the sharing economy. So most of the issues are in the domain of trust. Roughly 75% of those issues fall, or 70% of those issues, I'm doing the math in my head right now, so it's 67%. So what that means is people are worried about if they're lending things that the items will get lost or stolen. They're not sure whether they can trust these other people that they're interacting with in the network, so on the platform. And they're also worried about their privacy. And we've heard the horror stories, so they're kind of worried about, well, now people know what I have, or that this person's going to come to some place where I'm physically located, my home, my workplace, so I sort of lose my sense of privacy there. The other things that people worry about are that the things and the services that are the goods and services may not be of the quality that they either expected or simply just be poor quality. And then, the other piece is it really worth my time? And this is a really interesting spot, because when you look at who the sharing economy players and platforms are competing with, they're competing with retailers. And retail today, as I know it, and many of you do, is constantly trying to present goods for cheaper prices. So you have to wonder sometimes whether I should borrow the drill or ladder, or just go buy a cheap version of something, use it for once, and if it breaks, who cares? That's the ecological problem. And so this sort of value proposition inherent in helping the environment and that kind of green framing or washing is really tied to, is it worth my effort as well? So let's talk about the ecological issue, because that's really where the buy less comes in. And I want to make the point that, again, this is also, or was, the focus of that INDIV class, is very much presenting to all of you, user consumers, why buy less, especially to the American consumer, is a really important message. Not recycle, not reuse, but actually buy less, okay? So what I have up here is it's a very well-known graph about our global footprint as humanity on our planet. And right around 2008, 2009, we were using 1.5 planets worth of resources each year. Okay, that's where we were. And we're on track as a globe to get to 2.5 in 2015. And I would say the case probably is worse given sort of climate change data and so forth that's being tracked. So in other words, what we're doing is we're taking resources from planet Earth and using them to fulfill our consumer needs. And those resources are not, on an annual basis, the Earth is not able to sort of regenerate those resources. So we're essentially, our balance in our bank account keeps getting lower and lower because we keep drawing on it. And that's not sustainable, right? So let me ask you a question. So this is the global case. How many planets worth of resources does the US use? Does the American consumer as a collective use? Because that's the average case globally. And I told you that we're the world's biggest sort of consumers or users. So what do you think? Take a guess.
3.
3?
6.
6?
3.
Okay. And the correct answer is 5. And that's today, or at least when that data, was produced, which I think actually might have been 2014. So when you look at our piece of this global puzzle, again, we are the biggest consumers, and we also have the most impact on our planet. And that's why sort of figuring this problem out of how to get the American consumer to buy less becomes really important, and at multiple levels. I'm going to present a case for that. So global Earth Overshoot Date is a date that they track each year. I tried to figure out today what was the 2016 date, but it hasn't been released. And usually what it means is that that's the date in the calendar when we are now sort of using resources that are no longer being generated by the Earth in that annual period. And that date has moved earlier and earlier since it's been tracked. So it's another way of kind of visualizing the impact that we're having. So aside from the ecological case, this is the picture of the American consumer I want to talk about. So the first thing I want to talk about is that, and this fact is not very well known, and it's not actually very well communicated, and we can talk about why in the Q&A, but 44% of all US greenhouse emissions are related to the production and consumption of goods, of manufactured goods. That's more than all of heating and cooling, and definitely more than transportation. But when we think about what we hear when we're told to be, more responsible citizens and all, we hear about energy, we hear about transportation. We don't often talk about this impact. And the other piece of the puzzle is most of those greenhouse gas emissions are not happening here. They're happening in China. They're happening in other parts of the world. So there's a whole social justice piece to this too, where the impact environmentally, we're not feeling that impact. In fact, most students in my class, that class I alluded to, this is the point where they start feeling really bad. They sort of go, oh my God, I just did this because I bought a t-shirt that I threw in the garbage, 2 days later because it just needed it for that year again and I won't wear it ever again, right? So this is the kind of piece. The other piece in the US, and this is also the more compelling reason and why today there's an opportunity for the sharing economy, in my opinion, to make it worthwhile, to make that opportunity cost so, is because most Americans are stuff rich and cash poor. Thank you. We have very little in the way of net assets, and we have a lot of debt on an average case. And on top of that, most of this stuff that we buy is sitting in a self-storage locker. So 40% of the people who buy rental self-storage in the US have garages. So you can imagine how much crap we have, because that's what it is. If it's out of sight and out of mind, you must have needed it when you bought it, but it can't be that important because you haven't seen it in many, many years. Okay? But you got a lot of debt showing that you bought it, and you have very little else to show in the way of assets other than that stuff that you're paying to store somewhere. That's a very sad case. And I think in light of all the sort of economic, financial conditions in the US in particular, this is what's making the sharing economy that much more of a compelling case. So here's where I went off on a journey. So I'm teaching this class, making all these points with respect to sharing and buying and, you know, where retail comes in. And one, and I know her name and I've seen her recently and told her this too, one very smart honors student in my class said, you know, the day that sharing becomes as cool as buying is the day that we'll solve this problem and see more people start adopting that practice. And this was a spring-loaded class, right? And you know, that question, that comment stuck with me. So that summer, which was summer of, I have to get all my dates right. I don't think I'm going to get my dates right, but it was a summer. I think it was 2013, to be honest. I went off and I started thinking about that. I'm like, okay, I'm a retailing professor, I'm a management scholar, I built consumer products for Procter & Gamble in my engineering career. I can solve this, right? How do I make basically sharing as in the borrow case, the non-financial or the cheapest option and the more social option, as easy and cool as buying? And that's what started the Sharing Tribes journey. So in sort of a very condensed way, if I could do that, we clearly would see people would buy less, and that would essentially reduce environmental impact, increase effective wealth, which are both important outcomes given the data I presented. And here was the kind of key insight that didn't exist in the marketplace, which is if you really want to build the communal context in which this sharing happens, you need to embed it in closed social networks or communities. And this is really important because that closed social network resolves all those trust issues that most consumers say are the problem. Now you're exchanging with people you know or you want to know. You have a common sort of organizational membership that gives you a sense of security, and people have real reputations that matter. So they're less likely to screw you. That's really what it comes down to. So it minimizes the negative behaviors we see, and it sort of improves by reducing the barriers for adoption. And then kind of the other piece in the social sharing context is also that when you embed sharing in the communal context in a private social network, that's when you can get to the value proposition of almost free. Because most people are willing to lend and borrow. And I did a lot of sort of ground field work on these points. And then finally, this is related, all the research from psychology, environmental psychology suggests that the only way, the one way, the true way to help reduce our individual materialistic instincts is to sort of find more socially anchored ways to fulfill the things that drive us to materialism in the first place. So building relationships with people or being able to go and do activities with others in sort of the outdoors, all these sort of building back of the social fabric also works to counter materialism that's driving people to buy at the same time. So it's sort of this sort of nicely integrated effects by putting everything in a social network. So this is where the concept of sharing tribes got life. And I use the word tribes because it was really important to me to hearken to the fact that while I did end up with a technology solution, this is not a behavior that's unknown. It's a very old and well-known behavior. It's just, why aren't we doing it today? Spent a lot of time looking at that. So without getting into the details of the solution, when you build a business, it's great, you figured out what the consumer might want, but someone has to pay for it for you to be able to be a sustainable business. And so for my business hat, I kind of went around and said, well, who would pay for this? Because there's a cost to providing it, this platform. What's the business model? Because I, as a socially responsible business academic, could not start a company without a business model that had been validated. And so I went searching for the pain in the environment that I could match my solution to And guess where I landed? In the workplace, in my space of academic expertise. So there's a huge problem in the American workplace today, and it's called disengagement. Only 30% of American workers are engaged in their jobs. 30% of those other workers who are otherwise non-engaged are actively disengaged. And Gallup estimates that the cost of that active disengagement, the 30% on sort of the low end of the engagement scale, is $450 to $550 billion annually. That was where I figured there was pain that I could monetize. And so, given my academic sort of background, I started looking theoretically and otherwise into this case of how might sharing in a workplace community build engagement, build this social fabric that really is tied to the lack of it is tied to that disengagement. And then there was this case of the millennials that keeps coming out because millennials are particularly attracted to this consumer practice. I do have a question.
I'm just wondering if you could elaborate a bit on what you mean by engagement.
So there are two forms of engagement from an academic perspective. There's engagement in work and there's engagement at work. So in work is really the domain of what traditionally has been studied in the management and organizations literature, and that's more about the kind of work you have and your sort of career opportunities, what we call the classic job characteristics model. Engagement at work, and that's where this solution is sort of aimed at, is about the social environment at work. The people I work with, whether I like the company, whether I feel proud to be there, whether I get mentored, whether I get to meet other people, whether I'm making relationships. And that's where, from my perspective, and theoretically now I've been able to argue it, that this solution is targeted, is that engagement at work. And so, that being said, Sharing Tribes the company was born. Because now we had a solution and a business model, and yes, we have to go find funding. And I put 30 grand of my own money behind this business so far, so I'm not, I'll talk on this one. And I have gone around and raised money from friends and family and other partners, brought people in to be in this team to build this business, but that's when the business was born. So the business now is focused on companies or organizations who, coming into an engagement with us, already value sustainability. We don't need to teach them about why the environment is being trashed and what the problem is. They've already got that value. And they're looking to build an attractive millennial workplace because they're losing millennials. They're bleeding millennials. They can't hold on to them because what they offer millennials is not what most of you want, or even you're probably no longer the millennial because we're in that kind of threshold. So you're the generation next after that. But what we have right now is a software as a service solution. That's what SaaS means. And that's like a cloud-based solution like the things you're used to, like Dropbox or SurveyMonkey, where you subscribe, except that this is a business-to-business type of transaction for Sharing Tribes, the company. And then the people, the employees in that company, the company being the buyer of our service, they get to use the service for free. They're borrowing and lending, and in this case also volunteering services among themselves. So this is at least the concept and what we're building out. And so that, to make me feel better anyway, that my idea wasn't going to get locked up in the corporate world, because I am a sort of neighborhood organizer, and there is a case to be made that this is something that could enhance residential communities and sort of communal communities that are not for-profit or linked to a company that has a work mission. Most of those communities, there's no way to justify them as a customer, a paying customer. It's just really difficult, and all the work I've done suggests that that would have been a tough sell, and we can't lose or make money on that offering. So how do we extend this opportunity to communities such as that? Okay. is that we've got the Tom Shoes model built into our business proposition. So when the business buys a subscription for one community, they can work with us to give it to sort of a neighborhood or a less business sort of oriented, so school district or a neighborhood in the area. And I'm running out of time, so I'm gonna move right through it. So our product is an app, essentially. We are in the process, we just finished redesigning the beta version. We did testing on the alpha version. It's very much a retail interface. That's what UX UI means. And you know, it's sort of the state of the art when it comes to app development. That's probably the best way, and it's costing the state of the art as well. So that's the little pain point along the way to get there. But I think the sort of key message I want to leave you with is that we are hoping to get to this place where, you know, we're not only creating better places for people in terms of engagement at work and building these sort of engaged communities around sustainable living or sustainable consumption, but we're also having a net effect on the environment in terms of reducing impact. And there's a whole series of, you know, research-related things such as measurement and all of that related to all of this, but it's not the space to talk about it today. So I'm going to stop because I know I'm going to run out of time, and I'm going to take questions. And I don't know if we have questions remotely either. Yes, in the back.
Yeah, thank you very much. I completely agree with the one you know. I myself very much involved. In my neighborhood, we have a free market. People bring and take. It's all wonderful. But I don't understand at all your macroeconomic perspective. Because if everyone was doing this, we would no longer buy cars and share cars, and the car industry would collapse.
Well, it is collapsing from the sense that we already have that happening. So the macroeconomic perspective is a good one. And lots of users bring this up. A lot of students said, well, isn't it my as a citizen, isn't it my duty to keep buying? Because our economy is based on consumption and people buying. So not being the economist, I would say there's a really great argument made by economists pushing what I would call a degrowth model. That's what it's labeled as far as if you did a Google search on degrowth. And the argument there is, yes, consumption may at a sort of market level contract, which means people may have less income opportunities from a jobs perspective. But the other side to it is they have less need for the income they have if all they've been doing is spending it on stuff they don't need. What it may give them, the degrowth perspective says, is more time to actually build back the relationships they've lost in this sort of, what is the story of stuff called? The work spend something treadmill that they're on. And so I would argue that that's where, you know, from a kind of environmental economics perspective, this fits into that more of that degrowth model. But I would also argue that it's not clear that people don't buy, they just buy less. So they still buy, and you will still buy. All the data on ride sharing, I'm doing research on ride sharing and organizations, suggests that people still drive their cars and have access at least to cars for the daily commute. That's not the domain where we're seeing ride sharing really sort of pick up. The Uber option is interesting, but in the peer-to-peer kind of true context, it's in that one-off event. So our sharing that's going to happen on this platform is not for stuff you need every day. You're still going to buy those things. This is for the stuff that you need once in a while. It's either based on an event or a ritual, a party, a vacation, a guest coming in, or a project you're doing where you need things to do that, but you don't want to need, you either can't afford or don't want to pay the full cost of owning them and then storing them because you don't use them most of the time. And that's the sort of storage piece. So the sweet spot is this occasional consumption, and occasional in the sense that you have needs. You do need to have access to these goods and services, but they're not persistent in a day-to-day context. The other thing that we see in the sharing economy is a lot of millennials actually use it to try a lot of different products before buying, because the try before you buy is a very kind of millennial consumer trend that retailers are responding to. And so people also engage in borrowing or renting equipment because they're going on a ski trip. They don't know if they really like skiing yet, and they don't know what they want to buy. So I mean, rent it, check it out. If I like it, then maybe I'll make an investment in a good product. And so there is possibly the evolution of consumers buying less cheap, disposable stuff that breaks a lot to a higher, sort of more quality good. And that in itself, from a standpoint of waste aversion, will help on that end. It doesn't reduce the number of goods that maybe are being produced, but it does reduce the amount that are getting to the trash or the landfill in that sense.
Yeah, I was wondering about that, like what kind of consumer protection things exist, because if you buy a product that has degraded performance or may break really, really soon, you're going to feel cheated, or you may actually be injured. So there's all sorts of liability things that can happen.
So I'll tell you the short story, and I know I had to run to class. So when we started Sharing Tribes in January of 2014, my current CEO is from the insurance business, and I said, we have to get a liability underwrite. You know, we need property damage protection and liability. If people are willing to put their goods and exchange them for free with one another in the borrow-lend context, we have to protect them from the typical downsides. We went as high as Lloyd's of London and nobody bid. 2 weeks ago, one of my investors wrote me an email and said, oh, I posted on LinkedIn that you wanted a new CEO, and this friend of mine he's just started an insurance company for the sharing economy. You want to connect? So we connected with them, and they said, yep, we have coverage for you. So we will now be able to offer that liability and that property damage. And I would leave you with this last thought, that in scaling the sharing economy, what in my sort of professional opinion is going to be important is that insurance is to the sharing economy what shipping is to online retail. And we're going to have to get to where, and Europe is ahead of the curve. I was in Paris in January for a sharing economy thing, and you know, one of the oldest, most prestigious insurers in Paris called Maif stood up and talked about all the work they've been doing with all the sharing economy startups to basically get to where we can insure these transactions. And there's all kinds of sort of actuarial kind of issues, but they've surmounted them. So very good insight on that front. Okay, so with that, I'm running to class, but feel free to email me at my Sharing Tribes email or give me a call through the U of A, and I'll be happy to answer more questions. So, thank you.